You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, big day in court. It was the remainder of Michael Cohen's cross-examination, who is likely the final witness, not only for the prosecution, but also the entire trial. And there was a lot of news made here, so we're going to dig into that. But first, just a reminder for those watching, Glenn and I will be doing daily comprehensive coverage of the entirety of this criminal prosecution. So if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, Glenn, today was monumentally important. It was likely the defense's final chance to make their case to the jury through a witness. We spoke after Michael Cohen testified for prosecutors. He was deeply damaging to Donald Trump. And so the defense's goal here was to undermine Cohen's credibility. Did they accomplish that goal?
Not sufficiently to undermine the prosecution's case. Now, to be fair, they scored a couple of points here and there, primarily, I think, on what was likely faulty memory about some phone calls from 8 years ago and precisely what was discussed during which phone call, all of which is fully expected. But, Michael Cohen was on the witness stand for a total of about 14 hours, and he's not done yet. Redirect examination will begin on Monday when court is back in session. But over the course of 15 hours, the defense may have scored a point here, a point there. But in my estimation and my experience assessing the strength and quality of evidence in criminal cases for 30 years as a prosecutor, I don't think they did nearly enough to undermine what was a really powerful case on the other evidence and, most importantly, on the documents. Documents can't be cross-examined. Documents don't lie. Documents are not biased in favor of or against a defendant. And the documents lay out this criminal scheme to basically falsify business records, to cover up the true nature of hush money payments to gain unfair advantage in a presidential election. None of the cross-examination of Michael Cohen over the course of probably 10 hours that it lasted did anything to significantly chip away at the incriminating evidence.
Now, the prosecution, as you mentioned, is going to have one final opportunity for Cohen to testify in what's called redirect. What can they do here that might button up some of the issues that Cohen's testimony posed?
Yeah, redirect examination is so important. So the party calling the witness, when the prosecution calls a witness, that's called direct examination. And we have to ask open-ended questions. We can't lead the witness. We can't suggest the answer in our questions. But on cross-examination, that's when the opposing counsel gets to go after the witness. Isn't it true? Yes or no? And they try to box the witness in. But Brian, our common life experience tells us that sometimes you can't answer a question with a simple yes or no. You need to explain. You need to put it in context. So on redirect examination, when the prosecutors come back, it is the opportunity to clean up anything they think needs to be cleaned up as a result of how the cross-examination played out. So if Michael Cohen wanted to explain something but was forced into a yes or no answer, the prosecutor will come back and say, Mr. Cohen, let's go back to the other day. When you were asked X, Y, and Z and you wanted to explain and the defense attorney said, no, sir, just a yes or no answer, go ahead and explain. Now is your opportunity to tell the jury what you wanted to tell them. So there's a lot of that kind of cleanup that goes on. But even more importantly than cleaning up any incomplete or maybe inaccurate answer, and there will be a good bit of that the prosecutors do, it's really kind of explaining to the jury what the stakes are for Michael Cohen. What do I mean by that? Here is a flavor, Brian, of what I expect prosecutors to do on cross-examination of Michael Cohen. After Michael Cohen was cross-examined, you lied, you lied, you lied before Congress, you lied here, you lied there, and Michael Cohen admitted all of those lies. So the lies, that's one category that the prosecutors are going to want to follow up on. And the other category is Michael Cohen was cross-examined with some audio recordings of some of the stuff he said. It's been reported out. And here is some of what the jurors heard Michael Cohen in his own voice say when they played those recordings. Quote from Michael Cohen, I truly effing hope that this man, Donald Trump, ends up in prison. And, quote, you better believe I want this man to go down and rot inside for what he did to my family. Pretty powerful quotes, right? Michael Cohen obviously feels strongly about Donald Trump being held accountable for what he did. Now, the defense will say, well, that's why Michael Cohen told all these lies about Donald Trump in this courtroom under oath to this jury. The prosecutors will rebut that. And here is a little bit of how that will go. They'll say, Mr. Cohen, you admitted on both direct examination and cross-examination many times over that you lied previously. Isn't that right? Yes. And in fact, some of those lies you told to Congress under oath. Isn't that right? Yes. And you admitted that in your testimony here in this trial. Yes, I did. Let me ask you this, Mr. Cohen. Those lies you told to Congress, under oath, who did they benefit? Who did they help? Well, Donald Trump. Did those lies help you? No. What happened to you? I got in trouble for telling those lies because I was lying for Donald Trump. I got caught and I went to prison. Okay, now what will happen if you lie to this jury under oath? I'll go back to prison. Are you interested in going back to prison? No, sir. I've been there. Ain't no fun. Okay, let me ask you this. We heard recordings, Mr. Cohen, of you in your own voice saying you want Donald Trump in prison. You want him to rot from the inside due to what he did to your family. Do you want Donald Trump held accountable for what he did? Yes, sir, I do. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you think there is a better chance of Donald Trump being held accountable for what he did if you told this jury a bunch of lies about Donald Trump, or if you told them just the truth about what he did? Well, if I tell them just the truth, and is that what you've tried to do over the 14, 15, 16 hours that you testified before this jury under oath? Yes, sir, that's what I did. So what you're seeing, they're not necessarily going, piece of evidence by piece of evidence. What they're doing is they're painting a picture. And that picture is Michael Cohen told a bunch of lies previously, including to Congress, to try to cover up the crimes of Donald Trump, to try to help Donald Trump. And the only thing it got Michael Cohen was in prison. And now you bet he desperately wants Donald Trump to be held accountable for what he did, the bigger criminal fish in this particular conspiracy that Donald Trump and Michael Cohen were in. And he understands, Michael Cohen understands, that the way to do that now, the way to accomplish accountability is to tell the jury the complete truth about Michael Cohen's conduct, and Donald Trump's conduct. So what you're doing is you're rebuilding and reassuring the jury that Michael Cohen understands the way to hold Donald Trump accountable now is to tell the truth, not to tell a bunch more lies, which will just get Michael Cohen put back in prison.
Glenn, I gotta say, you're pretty damn good at this. That was a pretty impressive mock testimony that I just saw there. That was that you should definitely consider doing this for a living if you haven't already. But it really does go to show. I mean, that is the whole ball game. If Michael Cohen is true to his word that he does want to see Trump held to account, then he has a vested interest not in lying, but expressly in telling the truth. Because if he does lie, that's going to undermine the case. That's going to undermine the ability for Trump to be held accountable or to be convicted. And that's the last thing Michael Cohen wants to do. If he really is being honest that he wants to see Trump convicted, which clearly he does, then the best way to do that is expressly to tell the truth. He stands to gain nothing. It's actually detrimental to Donald Trump's to his conviction hopes if Michael Cohen lies. And clearly, Michael Cohen knows that.
That's exactly right, Brian. It would be against Michael Cohen's interest to lie under oath at this point, and it would be against what Michael Cohen is trying to accomplish, accountability for the crimes that Donald Trump thus far has gotten away with. And I have done some version of that redirect examination more times than I can count, because when we put cooperating witnesses on the stand, a cooperating witness who was a criminal associate, a co-conspirator of the defendant that he has now flipped against and is testifying against, these are recurring themes. And the prosecutors understand how to present this to the jury in a way that they will credit Michael Cohen's testimony, and it's going to be easy for them to do because there's a mountain of corroboration. Michael Cohen was pre-corroborated before he ever hit the stand. So the couple little points that the defense scored on cross-examination, as they do on every cooperating witness in every criminal trial, will not win the day for Donald Trump.
Just as a quick aside, a quick request for our Legal Breakdown audience. I wrote my first book. It's called Shameless, which is not to be confused with what I'm doing right now in terms of plugging my book during a legal episode. But if you would like to support me, then please consider pre-ordering the book. I'll put the link on the screen. I'll put it in the post description, or you can go to briantylercohen.com/book. I would very much appreciate it. Okay, Glenn, do you think that the small degree of credibility issues that Michael Cohen posed undermines the damage that he did to Trump? Like net, do you think it was a positive that he testified here?
He had to testify. He was the most important witness that the jurors needed to see. Now, did they need to see him to conclude Donald Trump is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt when they had all the other evidence and all of the falsified business records? Maybe, maybe not. But there are times when jurors need to see a witness who is of central concern and involvement. The reason I say that is because there were times when I was trying criminal cases, Brian, and I would present all of the witnesses I thought were relevant and necessary to win a conviction. And then my jury might hang 11-1 or 10-2 for a conviction, and I would get to go talk to the jurors after a hung jury was declared, a mistrial was declared because they couldn't agree unanimously on a verdict. And I would ask them, I would always kind of gauge how they received the evidence, what we could do better at a retrial. And I can't tell you how many times jurors would say something to me like, well, we heard testimony about Bob Smith being on the crime scene, but we didn't see Bob Smith testify during the course of the trial. Now, they didn't see Bob Smith testify because Bob Smith didn't have relevant, important evidence. Even if he had something of interest to say, he didn't have the kind of important evidence that I felt compelled to call Bob Smith as a witness. But I tried to learn my lesson from those failures. I always learned more from my failures than my successes, which is why I am such a learned man today. And I would recalibrate, my trial decisions. And sometimes I'd call Bob Smith, if only to say, you know what, I was on the crime scene, but there was something blocking my view and I didn't get a great look. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Because now the jury can't take that back into the deliberation room and say, what about Bob Smith? So now, Michael Cohen ain't no Bob Smith. Michael Cohen is a central witness, and I think if the prosecution had declined to call him, the jury would have held that against the prosecutors and said, listen, we needed to hear from the man himself who made the hush money payments and helped create the false business records to cover it all up. We needed to hear from him, so I think it was absolutely the right call, and I think he did far more harm than he did, good for Trump's defense in the couple of points that Trump's defense attorneys were able to score off of Michael Cohen's testimony.
All right, so Glenn, we heard from a number of witnesses. We heard from Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels, David Pecker. What is the crux of the prosecution's argument that was corroborated by every single witness that will likely be responsible for Trump being convicted?
The crux of the case is that they falsified business records. That's the crime. 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, and it couldn't be more obvious. This was not payment for legal services to Michael Cohen. This is repayment of hush money that Michael Cohen paid, and Michael Cohen had to take out money from a home equity line of credit to do it. And he even had to hide that from his wife. That's how desperately he wanted to please Donald Trump. He wanted to do Donald Trump's bidding. And then they falsified these checks that Donald Trump was writing, pretending that they were, payment for legal services. And then they made false business ledger entries to cover it all up. That is the crux of the case. Why were they doing all this? That becomes the second most important question. They were doing it to gain unfair advantage in an election and to get around campaign finance laws regarding contributions to a campaign, like paying to hide, to bury, to secrete from the American people deeply damaging evidence that might very well have led to Donald Trump not being elected in 2016. That's the crux of the case. That case has been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. And I personally, as a former career prosecutor, think the only impediment between where we are now and criminal convictions of Donald Trump is maybe one juror who might want to decide the case based on their own political preferences or ideology rather than a fair assessment of the evidence. And let's hope that doesn't happen. What I don't see, Brian, I don't see an acquittal. I don't see a not guilty 34 times over, given the power of the evidence that has been presented. And anything short of an acquittal, any hung jury, it could be 1 for conviction and 11 for acquittal. That gives the prosecutors the opportunity to retry the case. I did many retrials in my 30 years, and what I will tell you is more often than not, we won the retrial. Why? Because we got to step back, reassess, retool our presentation. We now know what the defense was going to do by way of cross-examining our witnesses and presenting their own witnesses, if any. And more often than not, well over 50% of the time, we went to a retrial after a hung jury. It resulted in a conviction.
All right, Glenn, so moving forward now, if I'm not mistaken, trial is off tomorrow on Friday because the judge did grant Trump's request to be off for Barron's graduation. Is that correct?
Well, that was one of the reasons. I think there might have also been some juror conflicts. But yes, ultimately the judge said, okay, we won't sit on Friday, but we'll be back for the prosecution's redirect of Michael Cohen come Monday morning.
Okay, and I'm sure Donald Trump is very much looking forward to the graduation of one of his children, even though he may or may not have been in attendance at any of the other graduations, but apparently this one was just too important to miss.
Yeah, and interestingly, he gave an interview a couple of weeks ago talking about his wonderful 17-year-old son, Barron.
That's
The problem
right.
is, Barron turned 18 in March.
That's right. He didn't even expect to be at a graduation this year. It just sprung up on him. As far as he knew, just a couple weeks ago, it felt like just days ago that Barron Trump was just 17 years old, and that he would be looking forward to his high school graduation next year. So with that said, we'll continue to stay on top of this trial as it resumes on Monday. For those watching right now, if you want to be able to follow along as we continue our coverage of this, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. Both of us are heading toward milestone numbers. Glenn's heading up toward 1 million. This channel is heading up toward 3 million. So if you're not yet subscribed, please make sure to hit the subscribe buttons right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.